I received a comment the other day from a follower from my YouTube channel, and they were asking me what I thought about sharing fantasies, sharing how you feel about your fantasies. Is it wrong? Is it bad? And I think there's a lot of mixed communication in this. I mean, most sex therapists, we're pretty much, it's up to you, whatever you decide, it's subjective. Do you think you should? But I get a fair amount of people who are actually afraid of their fantasies. Like when they think about them, when they come into their mind, their fantasies scare them. And that's a whole different kind of a mental health issue, in that really does take some processing, and we have to talk about it, because a lot of scary fantasies, or fantasies that make the individual who has them feel uncomfortable, is coming from mixed messages. Like they'll basically fantasize about an action that happens, but the reasons behind it are quite benign, and so that's something different. But if you're dating someone and you feel the need to share a fantasy, I think it's important that up front you have a very clear understanding of why it's so important. I mean, do you think it's going to make you feel closer to your partner? Do you think it's going to turn your partner on? Are you hoping it does? Are you hoping that your partner will abide by it, maybe join you in it? These kinds of issues have to be explored by yourself before you ever tell your partner about it. I know there's a lot of movie about, oh, we're sharing our fantasies, and a lot of people think it does incite more sex. But I've also seen it hurt relationships, and I've also seen it turn off a partner so bad that it ended up breaking the relationship. So I'm going to go through some things that I think are important about sharing fantasies prior to sharing them. Okay, the first thing is you should remember that you're not weird for having the fantasy. If it's a fantasy that scares you, as I'll address in the end of this, I would talk to a therapist, because there are dark fantasies, but we'll get to that later. Figure out what the goal is in your sharing. And I alluded to that a little bit in the beginning. Many times people share a fantasy because they think it's really cool, or they've talked to peers and they're like, oh yeah, I for sure want to do this. When in their heart, they're afraid to do it. So they're actually talking to their partner because they think if they share it with their partner will esteem them more, and then maybe encourage them, and they'll work together to create it. I don't ever think that's a wise thing. I think if you have a fantasy and you think holding it back is going to prevent you from being more intimate with your partner, then I would suggest you share it. But for reasons that you think it's going to help you get it, or it's going to elevate your confidence in yourself, I would probably be reluctant to share that, because once again, that's about you, and that's something you should talk to a mental health care provider about. Explain, if you do share it, explain why there's no pressure to act on your fantasy, now or ever. And I think when you share a fantasy, that's so important, because I've had couples where one partner shared a fantasy of inviting another person into the bedroom. And this couple had been together a long time, and it ended up going very bad because the partner that didn't want to have this happen went along with it, and then fell in love with one of the people they invited in, and it turned out to be a fiasco. The marriage disintegrated, their whole history with their children disintegrated, and there was a lot of bad feelings. So it turned out to be really problematic in the court system. And I'm cautioning you because I think this is where a lot of people get misconstrued. They share something, their partner may feel coerced, or if they don't go along with it, they're weird, or they're, frigid or whatever. So they go along with it due to peer pressure or pressure from their partner, and then it doesn't go well. You should never do anything that in your heart, your morals tell you, no, this isn't for me. Be prepared for positive or negative reaction. You'll probably get a mix if it's a fantasy that suggests your partner do something that I consider high risk, which is bringing another person into the bedroom. If you're feeling unsure about your fantasy or you notice dark elements to it, one of the biggest fantasies there is, over 68% of all Americans have this fantasy of having sex with someone against their will. And that is a dark fantasy. However, when therapists take that apart, that fantasy itself, what they find is the dreamer is actually trying to overcome feelings of insecurity, feelings of not being adequate in the bedroom, feelings of being in control. And so there's all kinds of other parallels that affect this person's mental health that are being fantasized through this. If you would ever think about taking someone against their will or having sex, that's an act of violence, and that could get you put into jail, could label you as a sex offender. So that would be what I consider a dark fantasy that you'd want to talk to your therapist about. Remember, the therapist is not there to judge you. They're not there to remind you that this is terrible or whatever. They're there to be a guide and to suggest to you what it could be meaning. They are there to assess what else is going on in your life, to give you personality tests perhaps that can help you get to the underlying issues you have that are causing you to have this dark fantasy, which may help you feel better about yourself and certainly make you more successful in relationships. And lastly, I think the most important thing is if your partner shares a fantasy with you, be empathic, be considerate. They're doing something that is extremely vulnerable. It can enhance your intimacy. It doesn't mean you have to go along with it, but understanding why they have this fantasy, talking to them about it, and then if you're concerned about them, helping guide them. Maybe you could do a couples therapy, or maybe you could go to a dreams course or a fantasies course and figure out what the assets are or what the ideas are behind the fantasy, because there's always some that make the person have them. What I'm saying is fantasies are an action of unfulfilled needs in ourselves. And so when you share that with someone, you're being extremely vulnerable. And you can see why that would enhance authenticity and intimacy. But at the same time, it can scare your partner. So you might want to talk to them prior to sharing and tell them, the reason I'm sharing this is I'm hoping it can make us more intimate. I'm hoping you can see the weaknesses behind this that would make me fantasize about something like this. So unless it's dark, if it's dark, a mental health care provider.